Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, return to the SNES 2. Fine, I'll talk about them edition. Forever ago, when I started the show, I did rather glibly state that I'd played a lot of games. I never claimed that such a statement made me any kind of authority on this subject, when you can easily trip over 100 self-styled academics of games whose words and opinions are far more accepted in the game sphere. And I do know a lot of my constituents and listeners have played perhaps even more games than myself, including titles I would never have touched with a 90-foot rusty halberd, and things like import titles that I never had access to back then, or let's be honest, now, because I have other responsibilities and hobbies beyond gaming that I spend my money and time on, like we all do. So, yes, gang, I guess you got me there. My focus throughout this creative endeavor has always been offering my personal thesaurus strangling and thousand ways to torture reference filled opinions on the games that stayed with me long after I'd played them to what I felt was completion, either an actual roll of the credits or to a point where I felt I'd gotten my money's worth, good, bad, or indifferent. But I have come to an understanding there's a rapidly dwindling list of SNES games we have all played that arrived at a critical time in gaming history. The kinds of games that were varying degrees of blockbuster title or underground slow burn hit that have somehow appeared in our collections and collective experiences. That I have yet to speak upon. Games we all shared, but I didn't really feel I needed to say anything about. Until now, that is. Why is that? Well, the reality is, as time has gone by, my thoughts and then have changed from being footnotes to being something else. A few because it would seem they had a far larger impact on the game world around me than I ever realized. One because I've thought more about it and realized it had a much bigger impact on me than it had first seemed, and should have had its own show way back when I was covering SNES titles back to back. One, which I have watched evolve from when I was a kid playing it to something else entirely. And one because I still, all these years later, have no real idea what I even played, but I want to marshal my thoughts for posterity, and no one can stop me. So let's get started on games with names you know, and I'm sure you have your own opinions on, but I'm finally talking about them. Something unusual would arrive on American shores in 1995. First hinted at to me in some video game rag or another advertisement section I read it long ago under a sardonic 128-point font with the words, "This game stinks." Earthbound would quietly leave a generation of role-playing focused gamers with warm fuzzy feelings of nostalgia and gut-gnawing existential dread as they descended into the last leg of the sleeper classic on the SNES. I suppose I would have been among them had I actually been able to find a copy of this game, and had the advertising campaign not been taken as serious as a heart attack that killed any sort of momentum around the title and utterly tanked US sales figures. I myself did not play this title until 2022 when it arrived on the Nintendo Switch SNES Classics console app. For those of you at this point who do not know, and if I'm the first person to tell you this, I'm very sorry, Earthbound is actually the second game in the Mother series in Japan. The game is Americana as seen through the cultural lens of Japanese developers with wit and an eye towards small town American life that lands somewhere between Little House on the Prairie and one of the more gentle episodes of Tales from the Dark Side. You control Ness, a blank-eyed moppet, as he guides his cadre of elementary school warriors Paula, Jeff, and Pooh to do battle with pools of sentient vomit, man-sized bugs, and stranger things on the way towards unlocking 8 sacred sounds from 8 sacred shrines in order to defeat an alien invader known as Gygax, or Gigas. One of those. The embodiment of all evil. Among the learned and the connoisseurs of all things digital entertainment, Earthbound is seen as something above and beyond the simplistic and dirty peasant games, where the fantasies are final, our chronology gets triggered, and the questing warriors all seek dragons. It is considered akin to some kind of 16-bit war and peace by those who hold it at such lofty heights, where other games in its graduating class, by comparison, are dog-eared and worn-down retreads of old Doc Savage pulps. It is a thing to be savored for its rarity, claim the true believers. A thing to be analyzed for its depth of complexity. I think I made it to town named 4 when I decided I'd had enough of this and I saw that I needed to see about it and called it a day. Does that mean it was a bad game? No, not at all. It is a very good SNES era role-playing game, one among many. Was I impressed by it? Well, that is a more complex answer. Had I not had the years of experience behind me that I do, perhaps I might have. I'm sure 1995 me might, and I do mean might, have been enamored with this manufactured slice of quirky pie. But in 2022, no, I was not. I'm not going to try and upset any apple carts about this game. If you still love it, keep on loving it. But nor will I entertain any notion that I should be an adopter of Earthbound as one of the greatest games of all time, or that it is something special. It was serviceable entertainment at best. Yes, I know how it ends by cultural osmosis. I know the final boss was inspired by Shigesato Ito stumbling into the wrong theater as a kid when a softcore pornographic slasher was being played instead of the cartoon he was there to see. I know the inspirations, the plot devices, the score, and the legacy. And now that I have played it for myself, yeah, the game is okay, but nothing I would return to myself. Yet I understand the seismic force this game generated and the hold it continues to have on those who were there in its moment of inception or who discovered it at pivotal moments in their own gaming journey. It is difficult to argue with that kind of ironclad nostalgia. Keep on trucking, fellow gamers, and take Earthbound with you into the far distant and pleasant fields of cultural immortality. If you want to talk about polygon extravaganza long before the PS1, then 1993's Star Fox is the game to discuss. The game was the odd rail shooter that got my attention when it debuted, mostly because it looked vastly different than anything that had been produced thus far and seemed to push the capabilities of the medium of the Super Nintendo more than anything. The fact that it is now considered one of the greatest games of all time simply wasn't a factor back then. Back then, it was just a pretty good Star Wars knockoff sci-fi flight simulation game. Appropriate since Shigeru Miyamoto himself cited the X-Wings in the Star Wars movies as an inspiration. The fact that I played this says something, as I am not a fan of that franchise, generally. You control the main character, Fox McCloud's R-Wing spaceship, through a series of terrestrial and interstellar corridor shooting galleries, located on the way to destroying the invading fleet of the evil floating spacehead that is Andros, a former scientist in exile from the planet Corneria, everyone's home. Fox is not alone, as 3 ships guided by the plot and the computer accompany him, guided by his flight mates Falco the bird, Slippy the frog, and Pepe the rabbit. The whole cast is anthropomorphic characters, which lends itself well to Nintendo's mostly for the time stable of humanoid animal characters designed for maximum friendliness and family fun, even if they were villains and many of the characters are inspired by Japanese folklore and idioms. Star Fox was the second game ever, at its time, to be a 3D Nintendo game, and the first to use the Super FX chip to achieve its polygon graphics. Upon its debut, it sold 1.7 million units in Japan and North America by December of 1993, which is an incredible amount from its March North American arrival, and every outlet in the game news sphere gave it overwhelmingly positive scores, pretty much 9s out of 10s across 24 outlets. No one denies that this was a great game. It was good enough to keep me invested to play a rail shooter, something definitely not in my regular wheelhouse, all the way to completion more than once. I tried to play it about a year ago on the Nintendo Switch SNES app, where it can still be played, and I realized I no longer have the hand-eye coordination necessary to play Star Fox. But it was nice to try it again. I felt the game was a complete package, and I've never felt it necessary or had any desire to play its many sequels and spin-offs. But I am aware of how many people still adore this game and play it even to this day, or players who have raised their children on this game, which makes it a lovely family activity game. This is genuinely such a fun title with a lot of heart, and one of those games that once I played it, I really had seen everything I was going to see about this series. But despite my lack of interest in further established franchise and the characters, I still recommend Star Fox to anyone who hasn't previously played it, which is likely a small percentage of people in the current gaming community. While its graphics and gameplay are far from groundbreaking now, as a historic piece of technology, far and away as opposed to the plot, that critical factor is the thing that keeps it relevant to this day. In 1991, Capcom was still in its initial unstoppable years and produced one of the most frustrating, controller breaking, blatantly and bordering on unfair, difficult game in Super Ghouls and Ghosts. This had been my first introduction to the wider Ghosts and Goblins series of games. And I wanted it because it reminded me a lot of the Castlevania series by Capcom's competitor Konami. In this game, you play as Sir Arthur, knight and boyfriend to Princess Guinevere, who must run across the Empire to save her after she has once again been captured by Emperor Sardius, a foul monster who has unleashed the ghoul realm on the land at the behest of Timu Satan. As this game is a direct descendant of its arcade quarter muncher ancestry, Arthur is an utter glass cannon, only being able to take one hit before being rendered down to his heart-decorated boxer shorts, and then to a skeleton shortly after that, and has access to an arsenal of some of the worst weapons in gaming history, with only the dagger being worth any kind of value for its speed and ability to fill the air with demon-slaying magical steel. The game plays out over 8 stages of stiff, barely controlled double jumps, enemies appearing right on top of the player character, and if you survive long enough, you can find a treasure chest that isn't booby-trapped. You can find teal and then gold armor that can allow Arthur to shoot up souped-up versions of his weapons, provided you can never get hit, of course, which quickly turns this platformer into a bullet hell shooter. Plus, to actually beat the game, you must play through it twice back-to-back. A second time finding a weapon called the Goddess Bracelet, which fires Street Fighter II Hadoukens at miserably short range in order to kill Sardius and Wish.com Belial. I literally could not get past the third level, no matter how much I tried, played, or practiced. I eventually consigned this title to the dustbin of my personal gaming history, and the general discussion around the game when it first debuted was split between outlets finding the gameplay perfectly balanced and being rather insulting to those who did not, and outlets calling their other outlets bold-faced liars and complaining about how high the difficulty skill ceiling was, that the average player could not enjoy the experience. But despite this, the game was praised for quality graphics and replayability, something I never experienced, and it was noted that a lot of innovation in traversal and set-piece design was on display. But even then, some of it felt like just another run-of-the-mill platformer. I would say this is not worth anyone's time, but in the years since Super Ghouls and Ghosts arrived in my life to its sad exit, something happened. That something was my wife becoming curious about the game. My wife is a tough audience. She only likes side-scrolling platformers where you collect things and is exactly the same game over and over, but different, and mostly does not in any way have any interest in a story. Mostly this has made it so she only ever plays the Super Mario Bros. Franchise up into Super Mario World, and do not ask her what kind of abomination Super Mario 64 is, because it is in 3D that causes her physical nausea, and what kind of waste RPGs are, because they're all story and no action. And only a few other brightly colored games like Shovel Knight have gotten through her incredibly high threshold of quality game. Something else you should know about my wife. When she's playing, she acts like a rabid longshoreman, twisting controllers till they creak in her tiny hands, spewing the most livid profanity on the level of The Exorcist, and blames everyone but herself when things go wrong in a game. And the louder and worse she is, the more she is having fun. And that's just her being her. And I am very proud of her like that. But in the moment, it can be a bit much, especially when she is hyperfixated on the game. She took the super ghouls and ghosts like it had personally insulted her, and she channeled all of her energy for a month into making this game suffer her wrath. My wife treated this game like she was the Terminator. She would not stop, would not sleep, would do nothing but pursue her personal quest at making this game roll over and die, of course, outside of her normal everyday life. And a month later, a magical thing that I had personally never seen before happened. The credits rolled on Super Ghouls and Ghosts. The real ones, after the second playthrough. Did she use save states to make it happen? Absolutely. But in the face of a game like this, it's all fair. Use the tools available to you. Did she almost stud the television screen with controller shrapnel? Very nearly many times. But she persevered in a way I've seen few do, and she beat the game on her own terms. She did something I could never do, and I was so proud of her for that. Perseverance isn't always easy, especially when you've had a life that, due to circumstances beyond your control, has kept you from completing goals both personal and professional. And when you've been trained to be discouraged, it wears into your soul like the groove in a record. But her persistence caused me to reevaluate Super Ghouls and Ghosts. It is a game I know I can't complete, and I wouldn't try my hand at it at this point. But it is not a bad game, just difficult. And perhaps not for everybody. And got my wife to play something new for her, and it has quickly become one of her all-time favorites. And for that, it has a value beyond anything which sales figures and review scores, or arguments about difficulty curves, or who thought what about it could ever match. It had the value of bringing us together as a couple to see this through to the end. And you just can't buy that kind of value. By 1996, I had become fully invested in the role-playing genre, and the SNES was my gateway to this arm of the video games market. When Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, appeared that year, I was willing to try it because I was willing to try anything role or play adjacent. As I've said before, I was never a platformer fan, and not really ever a Mario fan. But in these days, you couldn't actually get away from the little Italian sensation. But this game was different. It was actually a fun Mario game, for me at least. Long before something like Paper Mario was ever a thing, you could control Mario as the leader of a collection of adventurers trekking across the Mushroom Kingdom on what at first appears to be the usual recovery of Princess Toadstool from another bizarre kidnapping plot by Bowser. However, upon arrival at Bowser's castle, the fortification is struck by a massive sword that looks like Clippy's cousin. And if you remember Clippy, congratulations, you're old. That drives everyone out in a magic explosion, sending Mario, Toadstool, and Bowser flying in opposite directions. Soon, Mario is joined by a series of newcomers like Mallow, the emotional cloud boy, and Gino, the wooden doll, housing the spirit of an agent from beyond the Star Road. Bowser himself, as he needs Mario's help to get his castle back, and Princess Toadstool, who, for one of the few times during this period, decides to take the defense of her lands into her own hands, bringing the crew to 5 members. Hijinks ensue, as this is more of a comedy game for younger players, in an isometric playing field with characters who look a lot more like pixelated claymation figures, which was fluidly animated for the time, in which you confront bearded weirdos in their toy towers, a crocodile thief, crazed members of the Smithy Gang, and Bowser's existential dread as he blames himself for not being tough enough to stop Smithy outright. This was the last Mario game for the SNES before Nintendo jumped into the N64. And while the game was produced by Shigeru Miyamoto, and his desire to make an RPG using Mario as the focus, it is more the product of his co-director Chihiro Fujioka, who was employed by Square. Yes, that Square. as this is the rare joint effort between Nintendo and the RPG giant. The game sold quickly in Japan, easily ranking over 1 million sales with that year. The North American release was intended to be smaller, just around 300,000 units. But when it arrived, it was rented repeatedly at video stores and for months and was selling way beyond expectation, heading towards being a million seller here as well. Most games review outlets in North America gave Super Mario RPG universally high praise, mostly 5 out of 5s and 9.5s out of 10s, and cemented the idea that Mario could really hold his own in any genre of game, even the at the time niche category of role playing games. The plumber could do no wrong. For myself, this was the first time I'd ever truly enjoyed a Mario game. Yes, I had played the first 3 canonical Super Mario games. I'd played Super Mario World, Dr. Mario. I even watched the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. But while I knew the lore, Super Mario RPG was the first time I was invested in the game and the setting. It was actually fun. It was a Mario game that was a worthy send-off of the Super Nintendo console so late in its life cycle. And it finally got me on board with the idea of the character, even if I still don't like platformers or the style of platformer the character of Mario represents. Super Mario RPG even got a remake on the Nintendo Switch in one of the last year of the games for it before the Nintendo Switch 2 became a physical reality more than a draft concept whispered among audiences at game showcases, something of a tribute to its long ago counterpart. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars is a game I have thought about ever since it first completed it. And as the years have progressed since youthful wonder to the cynicism of age, and the more I have rethought how I consume and think about games, and where my place is in this ongoing discussion of games, I've come to realize how important this very unusual RPG is to me, and how I did not give the game enough credit as a starter character that has been the face of children's games for many decades. This is a good game, a great game, a solid recommendation for perhaps not complex role playing games, but a solid, happy go lucky, cozy role playing game that deserves more than we have given it. I'm glad people still make games like this, as it reminds us that not every game needs to be a dark, blood soaked, edgy, overly complex, or punishingly difficult game to be good. Games that just make you smile, make you giggle, make you groan at corny jokes or awe at predictable but sappy situations are still worth your time. It's okay to be happy about a game. Originally debuting in 1989 on the Amiga and the Atari ST, I would see Draken in 1991 when it arrived on the Super Nintendo. It was one of the first 5 games I had for the system. I was not yet into role-playing games by then, not fully. And this was a game I had no blessed idea of I was doing, what to do, where to go, or what was even going on in the plot. It was a hybrid of 3D polygons and blocky pixel graphics, kind of like one of those movies which features real actors mixed with animated characters, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It was jarring to say the least, and the free roam world full of random battles that could easily stomp you flat on the way to God only knows what was part of the problem. Worse, the Super Nintendo game was a poorly translated game from its original French development team, Infogrames, to Japanese developer Kemco Sika, and then into English with French translations of the Japanese version. This is an alternate story, different from the original PC game, in which the draconian people have been found unworthy by the gods, and they and all of their descendants are set to be destroyed. But 4 humans of dragon blood step up to prove their worth to the gods, and must collect 8 crystal tears to kill the gods instead. Or something like that. I don't know. It gets confusing after a while. I had to look up that explanation because none of that comes up across in the actual game or translates well at all. You'll create these 4 humanoid characters, and they will be the worst characters in any role-playing game you can think of. Weak, confused, bad at their chosen warrior, wizard, thief, priest classes, the absolute D team of the character world, where you can almost see them reading the technical manuals of which end of the sword is dangerous one and how to make the math work behind the magic, which, while terrifying elder gods in Dragonhide shout complex and poorly translated lore at them, or appear out of the darkness on cloudless nights of travel to rend them limb from digital limb. And that might sound pretty cool until you see how this game runs like a thumb caught between the gears of a sputtering engine. The unusual soundtrack is ear-piercing and unnerving in a way that has nothing to do with the mood or theme, but more to do with your wanting to mute the TV before you play the game and just put on just about any other sound in the background. Apparently, the SNES version was missing a lot of context, lore, subtlety of backgrounds, and clues as to where to go and what to do. And a manual written by Gary Gygax himself, one half of the creative team behind Dungeons & Dragons, which clearly inspired the original on PC to compete with Ultima and Eye of the Beholder, was supposed to be involved, and it was left in the PC manuals only. And that is a lot to leave on the cutting room floor. I've never played the PC original, and maybe I should, just to see if I would enjoy it that more. While the PC original was a commercial success, the SNES adaptation was decidedly not, with mixed reviews at the time of its release, even in non-traditional video game review magazines like Dragon Magazine or White Wolf, both of which were dedicated to the tabletop role-playing sphere of games. Draken has haunted my nightmares ever since, often with its ear-bending noise-chip monster grunts and screams still lodged deep in the trauma centers of my brain. This game almost turned me away from RPGs, and it took a Final Fantasy game to salvage my love of the genre. But I have talked about that in other places. If you must play this awful title, play the PC original instead. Let the SNES version lay where it fell in the muddy ditch of ignobility and stay dead, if you value your love of role-playing games. And if you don't believe me, go listen to the YouTube channel SNES Drunk. He at least has pretty good graphics and capture of the game footage to pass your judgments on. So, there you have it. The very last of the SNES games I have played back in the day that I have not previously addressed elsewhere. Should I have included them in my original run of Super Nintendo games? Maybe. But I felt certain titles held my attention better than these games and represented my time with the console. As I've said, my thoughts on these titles have evolved a lot over the last few years since I've begun doing this show. That is the wonderful thing about experience, the ability to reevaluate prior knowledge and act upon it. And these titles are certainly an experience, even if not the same as salient as titles that really changed my view on games like ActRaiser or Chrono Trigger. I know these titles I have talked about here today are well-trod ground as far as gaming discussions go, but hopefully I have been able to add a fresh or additional dimension to the talks that have, I'm sure, been ground into the earth. I'm glad I was able to finally address them in my own way here. And as always, thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Mast Llama, Martin Cabell, and the many listeners and supporters for being patrons and fans of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves Podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.